council members, we are now live.
Good morning, Philadelphia. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning to all who have joined us here for the Committee of License and Inspections today, February 16th. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcements be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I note that the hour has come. Mr. Brazel, would you please call the roll and take attendance of members that are in attendance? Would you please indicate that you are present when your name is called? Also, please say a few brief words when responding to the image that will be displayed on your screen when you speak. Mr. Brazel.
Councilmember Alan Dom.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues and the public. Good morning.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. Present.
Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson.
Present. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone.
Councilmember David O.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, colleagues.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, viewing public.
And Councilwoman Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues.
All right, Councilman Heaton.
Again, good morning to all my colleagues. I want to thank you. The quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is a public hearing of the Committee on License and Inspections regarding Bill number 200618. Mr. Brazel, would you please read the title of the bill?
Bill number 200618, amending Chapter 9, 4200 of the Philadelphia Code, entitled Donation Bins, to modify the locations at which donation bins shall be permitted, all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you, sir. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witness that we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this is a public hearing and this hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. Continuing to be in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or committees they have for any of the witnesses, I will note for the record, at this time we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Before we call the first witness for bill number 200618, would any of my colleagues like to make an opening comment or remark regarding this ordinance? That being none, Mr. Brazel, would you please call the witness we have to testify with us here this morning?
Sarah Adamo.
Good morning, Chairperson Heenan and members of the Licenses and Inspections Committee. My name is Sarah Domo, and I am the Legislative Affairs Manager of the Department of Licenses and Inspections. I am here to provide testimony on Bill number 200618, which, if enacted, will amend Chapter 9-4200 of the Philadelphia Code, entitled Donation Bins, to modify the locations at which donation bins shall be permitted under all certain terms and conditions. If enacted, the bill will prohibit donation bins from being placed on any property. The Department of Licenses and Inspections is prepared to make adjustments to our existing operating procedure to accommodate the proposed change. The department will on a complaint basis, inspect the property, and if a donation bin is found, will cite the property owner and the bin owner if known accordingly. The Department of Licenses and Inspections has no objection to this bill and is prepared to enforce its provisions should it become law. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the department's testimony. I'm happy to answer questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Adamo, for your testimony. Let me want to start off by saying this has been an ongoing problem and an issue for, I guess, almost the past 6 years. And I understand the concern of an outright ban. It may go a little too far, but here's the problem. Right now, the code has very reasonable code requirements that simply are not being met. Bins have to be placed on private property. Bins have to be away from property lines. Bin owners need to have written consent from property owners to place bins. Bins have to have a company contact information. Bins have to be maintained by the companies that own them. They can't be covered with graffiti, and they need to be regularly serviced to avoid short dumping. None of this happens. All you need to do is drive around the city, and it's been almost 6 years since we create the regulations from the beginning. Right? The reasons why we have codes, the reasons why we have regulations, the reasons why we as a legislative and policy body, go back and take a look at some of the issues and concerns, especially when it comes to workers' rights and other adjustments, is because it is a problem. And this is severely adding to the fall of the quality of life that we have in some of our neighborhoods. All right, so none of these happen. It's not that difficult. We do it with property managers, where they have to have a managing agent in our property maintenance code. Here is similar. You have to have an authorized agent. Nobody knows who that is. You try making, phone calls, you can't get through to anybody. All right, it becomes a breeding ground for short dumping. Everybody just follows the lead, and it just mountains into something that we should not be proud of. Same thing when we had these bandit signs on our poles. All right, we addressed the same exact issue with bandit signs and no way to contact anybody. So what did we do? We started holding the companies a little more accountable. We started holding the people who were hanging the signs a little more accountable to address these issues. And it was a priority. So these companies, they don't create jobs in the city of Philadelphia. The donation items are usually sold for profits overseas. All right, there is no benefit to allowing these exist under the current conditions. The Department of License and Inspections and Streets don't have a clear enforcement strategy. All right, they don't have the time to chase down owners of these bins and get them removed. Why should it be the responsibility of the citizens and in our neighborhoods, in our community groups? That's a good question. Why? I received hundreds of calls. These companies had 6 years to get their act together, and they haven't. These bins should be prohibited unless we can figure out a way to hold them accountable and figure a way to have a serious and priority enforcement, which we have not. All right? If we wait longer, all right, then it'll be a decade. All right? We deserve better. So that will be my opening statement on these bills. And I am in response to my community and other calls I get, throughout the city of Philadelphia regarding these bins. All right. I think it's a disgrace and we deserve better. So that being said, I'm going to open up to any committee members that wishes to make a statement and or have any, suggestions or concerns.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this important issue, referencing the quality of life in inner city neighborhoods. You don't have to travel far in my district to see these bins almost parachuted in without permission, without maintenance. And then when people see them, often they climb in, pull out clothing, leave the clothing discarded on the ground around it, to find articles that they want, which does say that there is a need for donations, but not in this way. And what bothers me is that I remember 6 years ago when we tried to give the benefit of the doubt to these companies, to try to give them a chance to clean up their act literally. But what I found to be true is that when you go in certain neighborhoods, and I remember dropping my daughter off to college, Howard University, and some of the people that knew DC said to me, do not drop your daughter in a neighborhood that has car bar locks, gates around their windows, or overflowing donation bins. Because that is an area that is underserved and is going to be a problem. I do not like that sign being hung on many of our neighborhoods when these unkept bins are allowed to send that signal to people who might invest, may buy a home, may want to eat at a restaurant in these respective neighborhoods. So I applaud you, Mr. Chairman, for putting your foot down and dealing with this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Jones. And, it just, as you're speaking, I mean, that is, that's pretty powerful when people are looking for homes and looking for, a place that, they want to later have for a while. And that is one of the telling signs, donation bins. I mean, it to me, it's willful neglection, all right, and disregard to anybody who lives in that neighborhood. And we deserve better. I have a question for Ms. Adamo, if I can. Sarah, do we know as a department how many violations we have issued over the past 6 years for illegally placed donation bins? And do we have any submission of any kind of authorized agent on behalf of the company for these donation bins?
So the total number of violations I don't have handy, but I have already asked our team to pull a report on that. So I should have that very shortly. There are about 5 different violations that we could have issued under the current code. So from the time that the bill in 2015 was enacted to now, I can pull a report on that information and get that to you very quickly. Can you, I'm not quite sure what you mean about the authorized agent. Can you explain that part of the question a little bit?
Okay, so in the current regulations, which is law, owner has to have a authorized agent, all right, so we can contact. And I'm not sure if it's similar to when somebody has an investment property and you have these neglectful and unscrupulous slumlords in our city of Philadelphia who totally disregards our citizens and their communities, which destroys our property value, which we have proven, nearly 20% in a defined area when there's a lot of violations. All right, but there is a managing agent requirement for a property owner. or somebody who's maintaining that property or some sort of point of contact. We can't get a hold of anybody on these things. I mean, it's very similar to the bandit signs, just much more egregious in a larger capacity. So, do we have a contact, a current contact for any of these companies? And do we have a list of all the companies? Because they're just popping up all over the place.
Right. So, so for properties that are owned, by out-of-state owners, they are required to submit information about somebody who is managing the property that is local. So that's an existing code requirement, and that would be something that we would have on hand. There are also other pieces of legislation that have either recently been introduced or are in the works that would require us to collect additional contact information when owners are LLCs or any type of ownership other than a natural person's. So that should also help us get to the bottom of some of the owners that are kind of unreachable to us. The other question that you had was if we know who these bin operators are and how many of them there are. Unfortunately, we don't know because the bins that are legally placed right now, they don't require permits, they don't require licenses. So there's really no mechanism for these bin operators to have been in our system prior to this time. So if a bin is legally placed, even if it's maintained perfectly and abiding by all the rules, L&I simply doesn't know who they are. We don't have that information in our database.
And we also don't know if they are playing by the rules. It's just that they're not being inspected because they're not required to. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a point of information from Sarah, if she can clarify. So why aren't these companies regulated to, place these bins on city streets and properties? And the reason why I say streets, because I know there's one in Grays Ferry that's not on private property. It's like, on the side of the street. And that's the one I get complaints about in South Philadelphia. And so is there a reason why there isn't a permitting process so we can actually really regulate or provide oversight?
I'm not sure if there's a reason why there isn't a permit process, but just based on the way the code currently reads, you don't need a permit, you don't need a license, you just need to follow this set of rules. Right now, one of the rules that's very clear is that they are not permitted on the street. So our current operating procedure is that if we get a complaint about a bin that's on the street, we would go out and inspect. It would be our vending unit that goes out. If we confirm that it is there, it's on the street, which is not permitted, we would place a sticker on it. It says, we were here on this date. You have 5 days to remove your property from the street. Otherwise, the city can take it. The ones that are on the street, we do have to work with the streets department to have those removed, but we do have an existing process. The ones that are within property lines, that would be entirely L&I that would handle those.
Mr. Chair, I just had a couple other questions and statements, and then that's it. Just one, if you could provide just data, where the complaints are coming from, the actual companies that are putting these bins all across the city of Philadelphia. I have had complaints in South Philly, as recently, I think, as last month. I have seen them, and they are eyesores, so I do admit to that. I guess partially my slight concern about the total ban is simply for the fact that, if these are charitable services to help those in need, just want to make sure we're not sending a total message of not being empathetic and sympathetic of those most in need. But I do recognize your overall focus on the quality of life of our neighborhoods, and that we're giving people the opportunity to engage in these charitable acts. But they're not doing it in a responsible way, then I can concur that then obviously they shouldn't be doing business in our city. If we go down this path, I would just ask that you and your team figure out how we beef up our efforts, whether it's with Salvation Army or the credible organizations that do take donations that are provided to individuals who are in need. And so I will be voting yes to get it out of committee, but I do want just some additional data just in terms of who the players are, the level of complaints that we have been receiving. But we definitely don't want to be bringing on quality of life of our neighborhoods. I just want to make sure that the wider public knows, in the event that this ban goes through, which I'm pretty sure it is going to do, because I know you do your homework, Mr. Chairman, that we are still in the business of helping those most in need. We're still in the business of providing options for those charitable organizations that want to support people. But at the end of the day, if they're not doing it in good faith in terms of how they do business here in the city of Philadelphia, then they shouldn't have that opportunity if it has an impact on the quality of life of our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson, and I totally agree with you. I mean, I would love for somebody to say, "Hey, we are here, all right, and we are accepting, clothing, for the betterment of our local people." Credible organizations like the Salvation Army and Goodwill, they have physical shops and they have bins, I believe, at their locations and as drop-offs, which is, to your point, serving the need of folks in our communities. When we had the hearing, 6 years ago, I mean, they were talking about, whenever they cleaned it up, whoever cleaned it up, these bins, just like bailing, put them in a bale and then sending them out. They didn't even wash them. I'd love to keep it local and have these conversations, even with our dumpsters. And maybe this is directed more to Ms. Domo. Even our dumpsters have medallions, which are registered and recorded. So maybe some of these conversations, Councilman, we can have once it gets out of committee. But we need to send a message that we're serious, and these outfits coming in here and exploiting our neighborhoods and creating short dumping grounds is unacceptable. I mean, unacceptable. They're only supposed to have 2. They got like 4. All right, it's overflowed. We can't get in contact with anybody. And next thing you know, TVs, mattresses, and anything else, and construction debris is being dumped right on our public's right of way and private property. We're not even sure what the arrangement is because we don't check. So that's all I have on this stuff. I think you get my point on where it is. And again, I'm responding to the people I represent. I'm responding to the citizens of the city of Philadelphia. Any other member have any other question? Chair recognizes Council Member O.
Thank you very much,
Mr. Chair.
I will just ask, I think Councilmember Gilmore Richardson had
I'm sorry.
raised her hand first.
I apologize. I did not see that. Chair recognizes.
If I could be next, that would be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. My apology.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo the sentiments of my colleagues relative to the donation bins, and thank you for the homework that you've done on this issue. My concern, I think, was addressed in the line of questioning from my colleague, Councilmember Johnson, was that I need to know if we have a registry or a list of all of these locations throughout the city. Because, if this legislation passes, then the donation bins would be banned. So who would then be responsible for removing these bins from the city? And if the city had to do so, how would we recoup any funds that we have to utilize in order to remove them? And then secondly, my concern was around the Goodwill stores and also the Salvation Army. I remember years ago, this is at least 35 years ago, my mom would go shopping on like Kensington or Frankfurt Avenue, and there was a large thrift store there, at an old supermarket, and they would keep some of their bins outside. So I just wanted to ensure that this would not impact, those type of stores. And those are my only questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, council member, and I appreciate you, talking about that publicly, because that is some of the conversation that we've had leading up to today's hearing, and no better way to talk about your own experience. So thank you so much. Chair recognizes council member Rowe.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think this committee is expressing pretty much its knowledge of this issue, and I will be voting in favor of this legislation, but I too am hoping that there will be some amendments and other opportunities because of my concern as well that a ban throughout the city may be too large of a response, when in fact the issue is one of enforcement. However, the enforcement is difficult because in speaking to some of the locations where these bins have ended up, for example, some of the pharmacies and supermarkets, they've expressed that it's not their bin, and they didn't place it there. Somebody placed it there. There's something, sometimes they don't even have a contact information on the bins. There might be, donation. And in fact, as Chairman, you said, they're not charitable organizations. They are for-profit organizations. And so I think that is a challenge for L&I. If we can, somebody is picking this stuff up. I mean, they don't come often, but there's some reason why they took the time and trouble to place this there. And again, it is, if we cannot come up with something, unfortunately, we may have to narrow and make it very specific about this exact type of bin. But I echo the sentiments of everybody else. The community does not want it. It's out of control. The people who own the property cannot control it. Where does the city, who do they fine? Who do they enforce it with? And if it becomes a city expense to start picking this stuff up and disposing of it, that's yet another issue of bad behavior that costs the taxpayers money they shouldn't spend. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, council member. I mean, it almost reminds me of somebody just squatting and for profit and not maintain. It's out of control. There's a lot of gas stations, little strip malls, that are.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to also thank Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank you for educating me on this process, because I had no idea it was for profit. So how's that a charity if it's for profit? So that part I didn't know coming into this, separate from addressing it from a quality of life standpoint, because we know organizations such as Goodwill, organizations such as the Salvation Army. There's also another organization. There's a veterans organization that I actually donate my clothes to, right? As a memory and support of my dad. All of those three credible organizations aren't for profit. And so that's very helpful information. I had no idea. And so that also adds toward my support for this bill. I had no clue it was for profit. Thank you.
Quick point of order, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to explain how that works.
Councilman O.
So apparently, Councilmember Johnson, they collect all this clothing, sneakers, pants, shirts, blue jeans, sweat, and it's sold by the ton overseas. There's actually an overseas market. You just throw all this stuff in and they purchase it. It's cheap, and then they'll go through it and go and see what they can kind of resell. And just like your tie-dye, pre-washed jeans, there's a market for this, apparently. It was shocking to me, but people are so clever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, council member. Chair recognizes council member Domo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your work on this issue. And I think we're all getting educated I mean, I usually do go myself to Salvation Army or Goodwill. And maybe if the city could actually let people know those nonprofits where they can donate their things to. I think people are actually believe when they donate their things, it's to a nonprofit. I don't think anyone really understood that these places were for profit. So whatever we could do to support the Salvation Army, Goodwill, and other nonprofits, we should do, even to the point of, I would love to see us put up a website and have them have their locations on the website. So like people will know all over the city where you go for the Salvation Army or where you go for Goodwill. And this way everyone has knowledge of where to donate things to. So thank you for your work on this, and whatever we can do to help, let me know. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunn. Does any other member have any other questions for Ms. Adamo? Well, I thank you for your participation. Thank you, Sarah, for your...
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Mark Schooley, real quick. Mr. Domo, do you think too, if possible, if it was permitted or a permit was required or a license was required, we'd be able to have a contact information for bins like these?
I think that would certainly help. But in the end, we're still going to have the problem of the bins that don't get the permit or don't get the license. We still wouldn't have the contact information for those, and those would be the problematic ones. So it would help. I don't think it would solve the problem, though.
Is it possible if people don't have permits or licenses and you can't reach out to them that they can be confiscated?
Yes, that's already built into the bill. We can do that now, and that part of the code section will remain, even if this bill is passed. So the way the enforcement works is that it is primarily complaint basis. So if we get a complaint, L&I goes out. If we determine that the bin is not there legally, we place a sticker on it. The owner is really responsible for the maintenance of their own lot. So the owner is responsible for removing the bin. If they do not, then a violation is issued to the owner of the property and the owner of the bin if we know it. So if the bin information is printed on the side of the bin, we know who the operator of that bin is, then we would issue a violation of them as well. If it's not removed, L&I does have the authority to remove it. Right now, with the legislation the way it is, there's not a lot of bins that need to be removed because a lot of times it's a property maintenance issue. It's something that we issue a violation, we tell them to clean it up, they clean it up, and it's a cycle. But if it were to be a complete ban, there would be a lot of bins that would need to be removed. So it would be a very large effort. And we'd also need to consider where these bins are going to be stored once they're removed because they are very large. So all that to say, L&I can remove them, but it would be a very large effort.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And Councilman Squillo, I think as I had mentioned in passing earlier, dumpsters have medallions. That's a registry, and that's revenue. For administrating, the cost of enforcement if a department chooses to enforce it. And I'm not saying that's, directed solely at L&I, but once you get a violation, whether it's a CVN or an NOV, and you have 5 days, then it, maybe L&I can and could remove it, but typically it would, get kicked over to the streets department. But streets, it's not a priority for the streets department, and I don't think they have the capacity at this time to do that. And if you look around, hence the purpose of this bill or the reason for this discussion is because nothing is happening anywhere. All right, nothing is happening anywhere. So when do you raise attention to this issue? So I think you're on point about some sort of registry, or if it's the will of council for an outright ban, then so be it. But, you know, this conversation isn't going to end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Would you like to be recognized?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the question from Councilmember Squilla. To his point, if Sarah could detail how often L&I has done this level of enforcement that she just described since the last bill passed. Just for the record, Mr. Chair.
I've already asked our team to pull a report on that. I would need to have that report in hand before I can give a accurate answer on that. But they are working on that, and I will make sure that I pass that on as soon as we have it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council Member. Are there any other questions or comments for members of the committee? I'm looking at the chat. If not, Ms. Domo, thank you so much for your testimony and participate in today's hearing. I look forward to some of the data that you requested so we can, you know, take a look at those data sets and figure out how we proceed from here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Council Member.
All right. So this will conclude the hearing, and we'll go into our public meeting. There being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I will ask if there is anyone present in this hearing whose name that we have failed to call on that wishes to offer testimony on the bill here today be considered. Hearing none, I want to thank Ms. Adamo for participating as our witness today's hearing. We value your opinions, and we invite all the panelists and witnesses to please disconnect for the meeting before we go into our public meeting. We will now pause for a brief moment for the proceedings to briefly wait for the participant to exit, which I believe has happened. So this concludes our public hearing for the committee. We will now go into our public meeting and consider the action to be taken on the bill that is heard before the committee today. When we we're going to reconvene right now. We will now ask Mr. Brazel, would you please call the roll and take attendance of the members? And again, please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen when you speak. Mr. Brazel.
Councilmember Alan Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Present.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good morning, everyone. Present.
Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson.
Present.
Councilmember David O.
I am still present, Mr. Chairman and colleagues.
Councilmember Curtis Jones.
Present.
Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
I'm present.
All right, Councilman Heenan.
I am present, and I want to thank you all for attending the hearing and participating. We will now go into our public hearing. The chair recognizes Councilmember Dom for a motion on bill number 200618.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that bill number 200618 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
It has been moved and properly second that bill number 200618 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit the first reading of this bill at our next session of council. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it. The motion carries. This concludes the, so this will be read at our next session of council, as I had stated, and this will conclude the business before the Committee of Public Property and Public Works. I want to thank you again all for your attendance, and thank you for having a conversation and looking into this issue on behalf of all the citizens of the city of Philadelphia. Thank you so much, colleagues. Have a great day. Be safe.